What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We're back with our favorite playlist videos that we did last year. That was the previews for college football. And today we're talking about the Utah Utes. We go through the top 25 preseason top 25. This is athletics top 25. So don't come at us yelling at us that your favorite team is not in the top 25. And we're starting with number 25. Utah Utes. We're going to be diving through their schedule, transfers, impact players, depth charts, all of that here on this video. So make sure you like and subscribe. But before we do that, we got to talk about last year. And Utah fans, I don't know how you're feeling last year. 8-5, which isn't necessarily, the best record for Utah, what they've done. They won 2 Pac-12 championships prior to that. But the big problem last year was they didn't have Cameron Rising or Brant Keithy, and they were both gone for the year. And big one was Cameron Rising. Their quarterback play was absolutely atrocious last year. Just wasn't there. And when you look at their season, they still were pretty successful. The only games they lost last year was the ranked opponents, Oregon State, Oregon, Washington, Arizona. Outside of that, they did win those games. They lost Northwestern bowl game, but we don't count Las Vegas bowl and the end of the year. But when you're looking at that, that's really what the numbers come down to when you watch out there. Bryson Barnes, played 11 games, 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Nate Johnson was not there. Nate Johnson really played running back for them. So from the offense perspective, they were definitely down. They needed Cameron Rising. He wasn't there. Just to kind of go through more just sad stats out there. Points per game, they ranked 93rd in college football at 22.5. And I don't care how good your defense was, which their defense was excellent. They were a top 20 unit. You got to score points, especially in the Pac-12 against those teams we mentioned. Yards per game, they were 94th at 342.1. When you're just looking at their passing offense, pass play percentage was 123rd in college football. Completion percentage, 93. Yards per pass attempt, 102. Passes per game, 116th. You could notice a trend here. Running, style, rushing statistics, all of the things that we know Utah does well. That was all up there. They were top 30 unit in there. But from a passing perspective, they just weren't very good. And that's why they went 8-5 and they just didn't look good. But lucky for them, as Christian's going to point out to you guys, they got some old dudes coming back on this roster out there that should kind of propel them to the first year in the Big 12.
Yeah. One thing I want to know before we get into all of this is while the quarterback play was bad, the wide receiver play last year was not very good. Money Parks just didn't have a great year. Micah Pittman's still there. Munir McClain is also there, but they went out and they decided they were going to get some receivers. They brought in Tayshawn Lyons. Dorian Singer is a guy that we'll talk about quite a bit here. Damian Alford is transferring in as well, but everything starts up front. And last year, that unit was just not a very good pass blocking unit. I know Michael Mokafisi had some good moments. I think that he played well, especially down the stretch. He's returning as their starting right guard. Togiai had a few quality games, but he just needs to be better. And then Spencer Fano as well. They are returning 3 starters. I think that's good. Caleb Lomu, I think they're excited about it at left tackle, but overall, this unit is going to have to play a lot better from a pass blocking perspective if they want their passing game to grow a little bit. Obviously, as you can see on the screen here, their run blocking grade 65.8. It still wasn't the best. Their offensive line just was not great last year. So they're hoping for a step forward. Guys who are returning, we talked about it all last year, but having a group of returners is always a good thing. And then, like I said, they've bolstered the wide receiver room. So hopefully with Cam Rising coming back and being that 7th-year player and getting some talent in that wide receiver room, you are losing a bit at running back. Jaquindon Jackson's gone. Sione Vaki gave them good snaps at running back and is playing running back at the NFL level. He's gone as well, but I think you're hoping that Micah Bernard can take a step forward. Jalen Glover can take a step forward. But everything comes down to Cameron Rising, like you were mentioning. Everything is going to rely on Cameron Rising and Brant Keithy coming back and being the player that we saw him be before that injury that kept him out the entire year last year.
Yeah, I mean, Cameron Rising, heading in before he blew up his knee in that Rose Bowl game, he was probably getting talked about a little bit of NFL buzz. Remember last year, even going into last year, they were talking about him being a first-round guy. Like, they were mentioning that. Now, I mean, we thought it was crazy at the time, but I just saw Bo Nix going to top 15. So, like, really, when you think of Cameron Rising, like, he could have that impact year for them. And he is one of the best college quarterbacks out there. Like, when he's healthy, this dude's on from a rushing standpoint, from a passing standpoint. He is one of the better quarterbacks out there. And I honestly think he could be the best quarterback in the Big 12. I mean, that's what you're looking at now coming in and healthy. He's back after that basically a year and a half. You have to like that from him. But I really, where the value is here in this team is their running back room. Yes, they lost Jaquin Jackson, but Mike Bernard is really, really good. I really think he does have some NFL upside, some traits that really translate. Jalen Glover is fun. Jalen Glover has always been one of my guys that I've just loved watching him play football. And when you're looking at what he's been able to do, in the limited snaps that he's gotten out there, I think he's been one of those guys that can be that difference maker, kind of be that big play guy for their team. Mike Mitchell's fine. Like, they have a very solid there. And you see that PFF run grade. That's where they lean last year. Now, if they're not so much one-dimensional and you think of like, they're not just going to be running the ball every time. Now they have Cam Rising. Now they have Dorian Singer on the outside, those type of things. Like, those things are going to really help that run game. And we might actually see a better run game this year. Like, we might actually see more production out of that room and more balanced attack, right? That's what we're really looking at there. They had a top 10 rushing play per average in college football, but then they had that bottom 100 in passing. You have to be more balanced there. And Rising's upside from a runner and that area. Now, I don't know how much he's going to be doing that with the injuries and everything there, but he's a gamer. He's one of those guys that he just can't stop himself from running. But that really helps out this offense. You could be looking at a very, very, very solid unit. This could be one of the better offenses that we've seen from Utah in this, in Kyle Whittingham's run there.
Yeah, we'll talk about impact players before we're done, but Dorian Singer just absolutely misused in the Lincoln Riley USC scheme last year.
Shocker.
We saw him 2 years ago at Arizona. I think you could make a case that he was their best wide receiver. He's a big play guy, and he can win at the catch point. So while his size doesn't really match that, I think that's exactly what they need. They are losing Devon Bailey as well, and so we can get into the notable losses, but I do think Sione Vaki, he didn't have a ton of snaps at running back, but it is important because when he was out there, arguably the best running back play over Jaquin Jackson that we saw, it was kind of crazy. But Jaquin Jackson, a very good player that transferred out this year, and then Devon Bailey, a solid wide receiver. He would do the little things well. He was a great blocker. But overall, like, it's not a needle mover to me. I'm not really upset about that. I think this wide receiver room is significantly better than it entered this offseason.
Yeah, they didn't lose too much. I think when you're looking at it on face value, they were able to kind of get back. And I think that they're going to be more balanced in that running back room. And I think what the big thing about that running back room that I love about them is that they're big play threats too now. Like, Jaquin is kind of that, kind of that roller, just going to kind of do that Vaki same thing, like just kind of head down, kind of do those things. I really do think Glover, I think Bernard, those guys give them that extra kind of that, like that big play threat out there that they could utilize because they're going to have to score points now in the Big 12 too. I think it's interesting the Pac-12 kind of shift to the Big 12 and what that's going to look like. It's going to be interesting because we haven't noticed defenses play like that. So they're going to have to put up some points out there. And I think this running back room helps. And offensively for the 2024 recruits. Now, this is offensively. We got yelled at last year because that's not all the recruits. This is the offensive recruits. We'll go on the defense here in a little bit. But the main guys here, Isaiah Garcia is probably their biggest get of the offseason when you're talking about just the best player out there. And 4-star kid. He's the number 21 ranked offensive tackle, number 2 Utah prospect out there. 6'4", 293 already. And when you're watching it here, this kid is ready to go. High upside body type is what 247 Sports talks about. Mean streak they talk about. And you know what his number one skill set is? Pass blocking. What do they need? They need pass blocking, especially moving forward when they have Isaac Wilson out there. Zach Wilson's brother. But I mean, when we talk about Isaac Wilson, a lot of guys really like him. He's a top 20 quarterback. They've talked about him being kind of a big play guy, consistent accuracy, and really solid mechanics. And you can say what you want about what Zach Wilson became in the NFL. College-wise, you saw him make BYU relevant. And I think that Isaac could be a better version of that. And that's exciting for Utah. Has to be. They had to find a freaking replacement for Cam Rising at some point. And it looks like Isaac will be that guy. But Isaac also has that confidence level where I don't think, if Rising was to get hurt again or something happened, I think Wilson's if the head coach will let him get out there, I think Wilson has that confidence out there to kind of sling it and just let it go. And that helps to have that behind your starting quarterback. David Washington, Zacharias Williams, some of these wide receivers, they just find these 3-star kids and plug them in. They can block well. But really, the two top guys, Isaiah and Isaac Wilson.
Yeah, I think Garcia could potentially see the field this year, depending on how that offensive line plays. I think there's opportunity there. And from Isaac Wilson's perspective, it's an interesting competition at backup because as we move into the transfers, they also brought over Sam Heward, he's been moving through. He transferred out of Washington. He went to
Cal
where
Poly. Cal
Cal
Poly.
Poly.
Yeah,
I
Cal
couldn't even
Poly.
remember where he's coming from, but yeah. And then he's back in a Power 5 program. Bloodlines there. I've never been a huge fan, but it's interesting because they went out and that was a spring transfer, and so we're looking at potentially some backup competition there. So I'm curious to see who the next guy up would be. Hopefully, we don't have to deal with that. We've seen what this team looks like when we're dealing with Utah backups, and so hopefully Cam Rising can stay healthy out there. But as we talked about, they moved to get wide receiver help. They knew that was a weakness, and when you're moving into the Big 12, I think you are, like you said, going to have to score some points. I'm high on Dorian Singer. I think Damian Alford can be an impact player for them as well. They brought in Carson Ryan, who I've always been a fan of. He's coming over from UCLA. I think this is a Utah tight end that is going to get drafted at the NFL level. We've kind of seen that. I think he's a solid complement. I think Landon King's there as well, but Brant Keithy's one of your pass catching tight ends. Carson Ryan's more of a do it all type of tight end, but he has good hands as well. I think he's going to be involved in the passing game. They did a really good job in the transfer portal this year, in my opinion.
Hey, don't sleep on my guy, Anthony Woods. When I was looking up him and kind of going through this for the research of this, you know what? Last year he played at Idaho, so obviously not a D1, but he was all first team, all Big Sky last year. And in 24 games there, 2,000 yards, 19 touchdowns. So the kid can run. And when you saw last year, he had 1,100 yards, 16 total touchdowns there, pass catching upside as well. So you saw that. He's interesting. He's a lot of fun out there. And they did a fantastic job of filling needs on this roster in terms of like where they were at. They're going for a playoff spot. Like that's what they're looking at. They looked at this team and said, we got our guys coming back. We got these old guys coming back, Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, all these guys. We need to fill around them. And like I said at the top, you can say it too. I was never like a big, a lot of people talked about Dorian Singer being a first round draft pick last year, heading USC. And I was like, man, I don't love him in that offense. Honestly, Riley has struggled with guys like him, kind of fitting them in those offenses there and at USC. And now he's back. And I think he's going to kind of replicate what he did in Arizona. 66 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. He could do that here. And this is the first time Cam Rising has had a true wide receiver one, kind of that threat guy out there. And so I think that's a hell of a transfer list that they got there. But let's talk about the impact players here. 4 guys that we think could have this. We talked about Cam Rising, Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy, Micah Bernard. If you had to pick one, I know we've talked about all of them there, but I'll have this question for you. Just throw it out of left field because that's what we do. Cam Rising, you think Heisman status? You think he could maybe get top 5 in Heisman this year? No?
No, I just don't. I don't think the volume's going to be there for him, because I do still think that they're going to build through the run, and I think we've seen that the Heisman has turned into a volume play. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It's not as much the story anymore. I think the story for Cam Rising would constitute, maybe he can get into some conversations midway through the year. This schedule kind of lends itself to that. But I do think that he is their most important player. We saw that all through last year. I think that he's probably getting drafted. It might be we're looking at like a day 3 type of player at this point. But I'm excited for his return. I think we all wanted it to happen last year. There were times where we felt like he was coming back. They were kind of vague about if he was coming back. And so I'm excited to see him back on the field this year.
All right, let's hop over to the defense. Why don't you take us through the defense, what they got coming back, and going through it. I love that they have a stud out there on their defense.
Yeah, so they have the one major loss, and well, 2 major losses. Sione Vaki, but Jonah Ellis was a guy that I think rocked last year. And so but if you look across the board at their defense, really, really good everywhere. Their linebacker play was really good. I think that Lander Barton is one of these guys that's going to be in a ton of draft conversations. as we get to it. Connor O'Toole is a guy that I really like, taking another big step. And Dave Zamiah Vaughn at corner is one of those guys too that I think we're going to be talking about him quite a bit. Now, this is your typical Utah defense where everywhere is just really, really solid. They don't have a ton of weaknesses across the board. And while not all of these players are going to be studs, I don't think, I do think that this is going to be one of those units that they play so well. They put enough pressure on the quarterback. And even when they don't, they just defend the run really, really well. This is a unit that I think can be, top, maybe not top 10 in the country, but top 15, top 20, and certainly one of the Big 12's better units.
They were absolutely dominant against the run last year.
Mhm.
Yards per rush, they were number 8 in the country at 3.1. Opponent rushes per game, they were number 1 at only 27. That's how, because opponents just could not move the ball there. Yards per game, they're 84, so they were number 4 overall there, 84 yards per game given up. The one weakness they had though was their pass defense. When you go through the pass defense numbers, pass completion percentage, they were 131st, right? Yards per pass attempt, they were 58. And a big thing that really stood out to me, that big red flag to me, was they didn't have a lot of takeaways. When you're looking at them, their ability to get away takeaways, they were 108th in the country last year for takeaways. That's why I think they ran out and really targeted the corner position. When you're looking at that, Georgia Tech transfer Keenan Johnson, who we think is probably going to start out there. And then let me tell you, as a Michigan fan, Cameron Calhoun is really good. Cameron Calhoun would have started a lot of teams last year, but he's playing Michigan and they had very, very good depth at that position, and he struggled to get on the field. But those two guys, for me, like, they had to go out there and get some voids out there in terms of that pass defense. They did it. They got Cameron, they got Keenan Johnson, and they were able to kind of take over some of those losses out there. And everything that I've been reading too about Utah, Lander Barton's a stud, and he's going to be moved around everywhere. Like, this kid is going to be flying around. They talked about him kind of being used in all different ways. They love it. Moved all over the front, they talked about. And they're going to need that. Like you said, Jonah Ellis, 12 sacks last year. They're going to have to make up for that. But this defense, to me, they really needed to address that corner position. They really need to address that secondary because of the lack of takeaways, because of the lack of, pass defense. But they've been able to do that, and you have to like that there. You talked about these guys, notable losses: Vaki, Jonah Ellis, Cole Bishop. Anything else about these losses that we need to go over?
No, I mean, when you lose a piece like Cole Bishop and the back end of your secondary, I think that that's impactful. But I also think that Utah, we've known Utah now to just kind of plug and play these guys. And like you said, they went out, they got their secondary help. And so I don't think that this is going to be a super impactful type of situation, even though he was kind of the leader in that defense. But I think the main one is Jonah Ellis. Replacing that sack production is going to be pretty tough, especially Connor O'Toole was their second leading sack getter at just 5 sacks last year. So he's going to have to take that next step. I think he can do it, especially with more pass rush snaps. But to me, this is not a group that lost a ton. I think, looking top to bottom, it's mostly ads, which I think is going to be good for their outlook this year.
All right, let's jump over to recruits. So when you're looking at defensive recruits out there, you're one thing you're never going to get from Utah is like 4 or 5-star guys. They develop it overall. Their overall rank was 41 in the nation last year, but their transfer rank was 34. Very solid recruiters, and they look for profiles. They go out there and get guys. Hunter Andrews is out there, a 6'2", 215 kid. Jelani Davis, safety, probably looking at him as kind of being that guy that they're going to develop as they go. Lopes, Davis Andrews, Sammy Hunter, Cash Dillon. A lot of these guys are developmental pieces when you're going through there, and you're looking at guys that are going to definitely develop, get in that weight room. What they do, though, is they target the transfer portal. They go out and get transfer guys that kind of fill and plug in as they're developing these guys here. But I do know that they really like Hunter Andrews, his ability, his athlete, kind of move him around the defense a little bit. Probably needs to put a little bit more size. But I do know that they like this class coming in.
Yeah, Hunter Andrews, I think, is going to project to mostly play linebacker. It seems like that's his natural defensive position, but at 215, you can't really do that. He's definitely going to need to add some size. Interesting, I think he's athletic enough to plug in at safety and be like a box type of safety. So I'm curious to see if they deploy him at all this year. Elijah Ellis, you lose one Ellis, you get another Ellis, and I think they've got to be excited about how Jonah's career went in Utah and hope they can replicate that with his younger brother. But overall, this is a good class. This is a Utah class. Like you said, they go out, they get the 3 stars, but they find the talent and then they develop them. And so I think this is a good class as far as depth goes. I think, there probably aren't too many impact players from this freshman class, but we'll see. I mean, some of these guys could hit the field due to injury or whatnot, but hopefully these guys can kind of just take a little bit of a red shirt and learn behind the experienced veterans ahead of them.
You tell me. I tell you what. Get Cash Dillon, the edge out of there from Corner Canyon High School. 20 more pounds at that edge, and he looked really good. He had a lot of tackles for loss in high school, and that might be a name that we, not next year, but definitely in 2 years. Like, oh yeah, Cash Dillon. Yeah, he leads the Utah in sacks. Like, he's the type of guy. Those are the guys they get. They go get those Utah boys that they can kind of coach up and get some strength on them. But like I mentioned, they do go out there and they get transfers. That's really kind of how they kind of shirt up these things. Probably the big one was Paul Fitzgerald from Utah State, edge rusher there. Gilman safety, Cameron Calhoun, like I mentioned earlier. They really went after the edge. They know they have to kind of fill that need there. Vaughn, edge, John Henry Daly, Keenan Johnson as well. So when you're thinking of these guys, Vaughn came over from UTEP. When you're looking at John Henry Daly coming over from BYU, ooh, that's going to be a fun game. BYU, Utah, coming over from there. So you're seeing these guys, Gilman came over from Stanford. So very, very sought after guys, but also just plug and play guys that you have to like. Anybody stand out to you here?
I mean, Fitzgerald, we didn't mention him on the depth chart piece, but like 6'3", 240, he's looking exactly like the Jonah Ellis build that we now know it can succeed within this defensive scheme. That's one where 8 sacks last year. I think they're hoping for something similar. I think if Connor O'Toole takes that step forward, you have Paul Fitzgerald on the other side. I think you're looking at a much better defensive front, honestly, than what we saw last year. And then you mentioned the corners. I think adding to this cornerback room was necessary. I also think that if these other guys take steps forward, we're looking at, between Zemiah Vaughn and we just looked at it, Elijah Davis or Smith Snowden in the slot is who I was thinking of. Like, if those two guys take a step forward and they have another outside corner, we're looking at just a dominant secondary, which is what we know Utah to be. So this is a great transfer group as well. We talked about it with the offense, but they just hit needs. They plug and play guys, and this is how they're building their team. I think it's a solid recipe to get into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk about impact players here. Zemiah Vaughn, Kareem Reed, and Connor O'Toole. Those of you that don't know who Connor O'Toole, well, if you're watching this, Utah fans, you know who Connor O'Toole is. But he missed a lot of games last year. He played in 8 games down the stretch, started 5. And in those basically 8 games, he had 31 total tackles, 4.5 sacks. He was one of those guys that was really coming after it down there. And with Jonah Ellis being gone, O'Toole, if he's healthy, they're probably looking at him as being their guy moving forward, like at the beginning of the season, as long as he's there based on that. And I'm just going to go back to Calhoun. I know I'm a Michigan homer, but I really think that, I know he's not on the list, but if Calhoun's going to win Utah a game this year, interception, big play, I have a lot of faith in him there. Anybody on the impacts that you want to talk about?
No, I feel like we've talked about most of their defense, but to me, it's Connor O'Toole. He's got to take that next step. I think we talk about the 12 sacks that Jonah Ellis had. If you can get 5 more from Connor O'Toole, get him to 10, and then you're getting that better production from transfers and plug and play guys. I think you're looking at, like I said, just a really competitive unit. And in the Big 12, when you look at the quarterback play across the conference, like, I think you're setting yourself up to win the conference pretty handedly. We'll talk about their schedule here in a second, though, so I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Let's get into it. So here's the schedule. Here's what we're looking at here. We're going to kind of go through it and just talk about their over-under wins. 9.5 is their over-under wins. That's what they were at last year, and they hit 8, obviously, so they hit under that. When you look at the schedule, versus Southern Utah, versus Baylor, that is not a Big 12 game. So that was scheduled prior, so that would be a non-conference game against Baylor there. Utah State at Utah State. Yeah, everything is strange at college football right now. Right. Like, I don't even know. Like, I don't know what's happening right now. At Oklahoma State's probably the big one if you want to circle that one there. September 21st versus Arizona. Revenge game at home against Arizona after what happened to them last year. At Arizona State versus TCU. At Houston versus BYU. We are back. The rivalry game is there. We're excited about that in terms of 2010, basically be a conference contest. It's going to come down there. So it's going to be fun to see that. Colorado at Colorado versus Iowa State, and in a very, very, very tough game at UCF at the end there. What stands out about their schedule to you, and where do you think at that win total 9.5? Where are you leaning?
So the Oklahoma State, Arizona State, TCU, Houston is kind of a sneaky rough stretch in the middle there. But down the stretch, like I think Colorado is a winnable game. I think BYU should be a very winnable game. Iowa State's going to be competitive as well this year. That's a team that I think I'm a little bit higher on than most people are. And then I talked about it, but UCF looks like a very, very competitive team on paper. We'll see if it comes to fruition. The sneaky part, though, I think Arizona is going to be a little bit down this year. They lost Jed Fish. They
Yeah.
had a lot of guys transfer out. So to me, like if they can get through their first 4 games, if they can go to Oklahoma State and win, I think we're easily hitting the over this year. I think we're looking at 10, 11 wins potentially. At Houston's one where I think anything can happen because Houston's got a dynamic offense, but they had a lot of guys transfer out as well. And so to me, this is a team that they're going to hover right around that over under total. Vegas is good at their jobs out there, but I'm going with the over for this team this year because I think there's a ton of like toss up games where I'll bank on Cam Rising's experience and this defense kind of carrying them to those wins. So give me the over on Utah's over under this year.
All right, first disagreement. I'm going under on this bad boy.
Okay.
I'm going to go under 9.5. To me, it comes down. I think the game that's going to make this, this season for them if they hit over under. And I know you mentioned a couple. Iowa State to me. I think at home against Iowa State, that to me is like a very red flag game because I do think you're looking ahead at probably UCF, which could be for the Big 12 title. I think UCF is that good where you're looking ahead a little bit. A tough Iowa State squad there. And I'm not totally out on Colorado. I don't know. At Colorado, November 16th, like there's some tough games in there. I do think Utah is they probably will crush Colorado, but I do think that Iowa State game is tricky. And I think Oklahoma State is the best team in the Big 12. So, I mean, if Utah fans want to come yell at me, I do think I know they have Bowman starting, but hey, you got Cam Rising starting for his 6th, 7th year anyway. So you're looking at that. You have these two kind of veteran QBs there, but I'm going to go under. I think they hit 9 wins, but it would not shock me to see them hit that 10, 11 wins either. But I do think 9 is where I'm sitting right now. And it really comes down to that Iowa State UCF game at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, of that like final 3 games, I think the 2 toughest games are the last 2. I think going to Colorado and winning might not be that difficult by the end of next season. I mean, obviously it's a test against Shadur Sanders, but I wouldn't sleep on Rocco Becht. I wouldn't sleep on KJ Jefferson at UCF. I think that there's some good things happening at those 2 programs. So I think you're right. I think it does come down to those 2 games. I think there's a chance they sneak out of the Iowa State game with a win because of the defense. At UCF is tough, man. I think you're right. I think that could be for the Big 12 title. I know that sounds a little crazy, but I'm just very high on that team. Overall, though, I guess my question to you, do you think that the clock is ticking on Kyle Whittingham if they do have another under year? The way they've built this program is in a certain way that might not be as sustainable in college football at this moment. What are you thinking about the outlook of this team moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think going to the Big 12 helps because I do think they can be a dominant program there, and you're kind of looking at that. I think he's there. I think Whittingham's there till the end because I
Probably.
think what he's built there and everything there. And I think that recruiting wise, he's able still to get some guys. And I do see this. I think that Utah has been able to really navigate the transfer portal really well. They haven't really gone away from it, right? They haven't been one of those teams that's kind of been like, nervous about it. Clemson, right? Dabo out there or whatever. And they're able to attack. They know they also know what they need from the transfer portal. Some teams just throw out, look for 5-star, 4-star kids, and they're coming in, right? We see that a lot. Lincoln Riley really does that at USC a little bit, where Utah, they target guys that they need. So I do think there can be consistent winners, 10, 11 wins there. But you know how college football fans are. If Utah is not making a playoff, at some point in this 12-team expanded playoff, I do think the seat gets maybe a little hot, and moving forward, it's like, hey, you got to get us one in here, and I think they will. I think they think it's this year's team, where I don't, but maybe possibly they sneak in there as the Big 12 champion. But being outside the Power Four, that's going to hurt them overall. I mean, especially with the new NIL rules and all that. So definitely kind of trending downward a little bit, unless they can sneak into the Power Four somehow.
Yeah, to me, this is one of those where like they have to win the Big 12 to make the playoffs, I think. Because when you look at the at-large bids, I think it's going to SEC and probably Big 10 teams primarily. So that's where it gets a little difficult, because when you look at the path of some of the other Big 12 teams and how they're kind of constructing their rosters, I do think that there's a chance that Utah's just like a few players away with the current build. So I'm curious to watch it unfold. Overall, though, this program is exactly where it is every year, in that like you're pretty comfortable that they are gonna at least get to a bowl game, right? Like that's the worst case scenario, is they are in a bowl game. Now the expectations have to be a little bit different with the 12-team playoff, but overall, this team, I'm into it clearly with the hitting the over on their 9.5. I think this is a 10-win team, but I think it all comes down to Cam Rising, like we talked about at the top. I think if Cam Rising plays like we've seen him play, and is just pinpoint accurate, then I think we're looking at a lot more wins than we got last year with that abysmal quarterback play.
Abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. All right, Utah fans, let us know why we're stupid, why we're wrong, or why we're right in the comments. Let us know where you're at with this team. What do you think their over-under is going to be? Do you think they're going to hit the over on the 9.5? We will be keeping a spreadsheet, track sheet. I just created it of like who's going to have the most of these right at the end of the year, and we will be accountable, because that's what we are. So appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys on the next Top 25 video.